Hi guys, welcome back to Math 6. We're jumping ahead again today. We're going to be on reteaching 11.5, random samples and surveys. So again, chapter 11 is all about statistics and gathering large quantities of information. So we're going to move ahead to this topic for this week. Starting at the top of our reteach. Carlos is curious about sports that students in his school like best. He cannot interview every student in the school, but he could interview a sample of the school's population. So again, we have a kid named Carlos, and he wants to conduct a survey about the most popular sports at his school, but he knows there might be too many students or he doesn't have access to every student, so he's going to interview some of the students, or the word population, some of the people in the target group that he's talking about, in this case, his students or co-students at his school. Carlos wants a random sample. A random sample is if everyone has an equal chance of being selected. How will Carlos get a random sample? He considers two possibilities. So what a random sample means is you have a pool of people. So again, here it's the students at a school. And for it to be considered a random sample, meaning the people that he will actually interview for his survey, every student has to have the equal opportunity of being selected. So an example of a non-random sample is if he went to the soccer team, and just the soccer team, to ask what their favorite sport was. That's not a random sample because not every student had the equal opportunity. Doesn't mean every student will be, but every student had the equal opportunity of being picked for this survey. Another example of not a random sample would be if he went to his third bell English class and only his third bell English class. That's not a random sample because what about all the students in every other bell at that moment? That would not be a random sample because they didn't have the equal opportunity of being selected. So a random sample means every student has to have the opportunity or an equal chance of being selected. So he considers two possibilities to ensure he gets a random sample. One, he can interview 30 students at a soccer game, or he can interview 5 students in each of his 6 classes. Take a second, think it through. Which one do you think is an example of a random sample and which one is not? Carlos realizes that the students at the soccer game probably like soccer better than other sports. This would not be a random sample because he's only picking soccer fans when he's asking a question about favorite sports. So not a random sample. It's only being posed to a very select group of people who have a very specific interest. So he decides to interview people between classes. That way he has 6 classes, a great spread of people, all with hopefully diverse interests. Now we have the question of what he will ask. What questions will he ask? He considers 2 possibilities. Question 1, which sport do you prefer? Football, soccer, baseball, or tennis? The second question he asks, or is considering asking, he's going to ask one of the 2. Second question is, which do you enjoy most? The slow sport of baseball or one of the more exciting sports like football, soccer, or tennis? The second question is biased. That's not great. Biased means it's going to influence the decision in one way or the other rather than it being an authentic representation of what the individual being interviewed might actually prefer. So the second question is biased. It makes one answer seem better than the other. One seems better than the other, meaning he calls the baseball a slow sport, whereas he refers to football, soccer, or tennis as an exciting sport. So Carlos decides to ask the first question. So he's going to ask the first question, and he's going to interview 5 people, 5 students in each of his 6 class changes. So what we've hit on so far is population, which just means you have a group of people that you're going to survey. You have a specific group, I guess. So in this case, it was all the students at his school were his population. But he can't interview the entire population. That would take way too long. So he's going to come up with a random sample that reflects the population. A random sample has to include all the diverse opinions and perspectives that your population might have. It cannot be a specific group of people that might all be leaning one way or another. So again, it might not be good to interview 30 students at a soccer game when he's asking about what's your favorite sport. Those are specific people with a specific interest, and he needs the people to reflect all possible interests. So let's kind of work through our reteaching. And then for today, you're actually not going to do your homework, but we'll do our homework together on Zoom tomorrow. That way we can talk through these more. All right, number 1. You want to find out how many people in your community are vegetarian. Where would be the best place to take a survey? Again, there are lots of answers that you could put for this. There's no one answer. You're just kind of brainstorming it. You're coming up with a solution that's going to reflect a wide spread of people, not a specific group of people. My first thought for this would be the supermarket or the grocery store, because both vegetarians and meat eaters all are going to shop at the grocery store. So you have an equal likely opportunity of encountering a vegetarian as you would a non-vegetarian. So I'm going to say the supermarket or the grocery store. I'm writing at an angle. Grocery store. But you could put any other kind of answer. You could even say the mall. People who frequent the mall have a varied diet that they might adhere to. All right. Our next set of questions is, which question is biased or fair? Remember, biased influences the decision of the person you're interviewing and might sway their answer one way or another that is not reflective of their actual opinion. If we say a question is fair, we're saying that's a good question. It doesn't influence the interviewee. Question 2. Will you vote for the young, inexperienced candidate, Mr. Sung, or the experienced candidate, Ms. Lopez? Take a second. This question is biased. It influences the opinion of the interviewee, the person who is supposed to be answering, by calling Mr. Sung young and inexperienced, while calling Ms. Lopez experienced. Inexperienced is an insult when it comes to this sort of thing, so this is definitely a biased question. Not a good question to ask in an interview. The second question says, will you vote for Mr. Sung or Ms. Lopez? That's an example of a fair question. You're not prompting the person you're interviewing in one way or the other. You're not creating a more favorable answer between the two. You're just simply asking, who are you voting for? So this is an example of a fair question. Next, you plan to survey people to see what percent of their home and what percent own their home and what percent rent. Tell whether or not the following will give a random sample. Explain. Again, random sample means every person has an equal opportunity to be included. A non-random sample only caters to a very specific set. Question 4. You interview people outside a pool supply store in the suburbs. Question 5, you interview people in the street near an apartment complex. Number 6, you mail a survey to every 20th person in the telephone book. Let's look at number 4 first. You interview people outside a pool supply store in the suburbs. I'm going to say that is not a random sample. The reason I say that is if you are buying pool supplies, you most likely have a pool in your backyard. If you have a pool in your backyard, you most likely own the home. If you're renting, maybe someone else is taking care of the pool. Maybe you have a community pool that you're not buying pool supplies for. But this is a specific market to be going to a pool store. It has to imply that you have a pool. Most of the time, if you have a pool, you own a home. So we're going to say this is not a random sample. But I'm curious to what your opinions on this one might be. Number 5, you interview people in a street near an apartment complex. Again, I would say this is not a fair or random sample because you are standing in front of an apartment complex. People who are coming and going from an apartment complex rent. You rent apartments. So you're going to have a higher percentage of people who rent simply because you're standing next to a place where people who rent live. So this is not a random sample. This is very specific. You haven't done a good enough job of finding a diversity of your people. Not a random sample. Number 6, you mail a survey to the 20th person in the phone book. That is a random sample. There's no way of knowing whether or not the 20th person is going to be a renter or an owner. It is completely random. Anyone has the opportunity to be picked. They just have to be the 20th person. That's a fair and random sample. Oops, random. All right, like I said, we're going to go ahead and work through the practice side together on Zoom so you don't have to do any homework today. We'll do it together, and I hope this was interesting. This is, again, the start of random samples and surveys, so collecting information from individuals to be able to paint a picture of whatever the question is that you're looking to find an answer to. All right, thanks, guys.